Everything you see inside of space-time is your construction. From the consciousness point of view, space-time isn't fundamental. It's just a VR headset. The brain is giving us some clues about how the headset is being generated. There's some deeper reality. It's up to each of us to take off our own headset.
Dr. Donald Hoffman is a cognitive science professor from MIT. He has spent his career exploring how we perceive reality and trick ourselves into believing this is all there is, when in fact there is a lot more and we know that it's there.
We're at this interesting intersection where high-energy theoretical physics is now saying there's something beyond space-time. And what is it?
The hardest thing that many lay people have to decide is, do I believe in science or do I believe in God? Is there a place where those two things literally meet?
The technologies that we should eventually evolve are going to be mind-boggling. Once you know how to program the headset, you make the laws of the headset and you can change them.
Could this technology allow me to download a language? Could it allow me to regrow a limb?
In the Matrix, right, Neo all of a sudden downloads something and I know Kung Fu. I'm not saying I know how to do it. I'm saying I don't see a principled obstruction. Ultimately, who are you? You are the infinite consciousness looking through a very, very small headset. You've chosen to go from infinity to just a few trillion experiences, but you are that infinite consciousness.
I love when people accidentally prove God.
But is there a risk with unlocking this capability?
Absolutely. Once you have that kind of power, you're playing God.
Wow. Hi, I'm Mayim Bialik.
And I'm Jonathan Cohen.
And welcome to our breakdown. Or maybe not. Maybe it's just a perception. Today we're going to be talking about the potential breakdown of everything that we perceive as real. And you might be thinking, gosh, that sounds really heady, very meta. Guess what? It's not. What if we were to propose to you that everything that you experience as your reality is a headset that can be taken off in very specific ways? And what if we were to tell you that there's a mathematical explanation for why that actually might be the best description of the reality that we're all experiencing?
We're speaking today to someone who is working on software and technology that can truly change the nature of reality and how we all perceive it, including what that means for medicine, time travel, and our overall well-being.
Dr. Donald Hoffman holds a PhD from MIT. He's a professor emeritus of cognitive sciences, and he has written over 100 scientific papers, 3 books. His latest book, The Case Against Reality: How Evolution Hid the Truth from Our Eyes, is a really, really incredible exploration of what we perceive, how we got to the place where we perceive what we do, and how easy it is to trick ourselves into believing this is all there is, when in fact there is a lot more and we know that it's there. Physics knows that it's there. Neuroscience knows that it's there. Mystics know that it's there, but it's really the kind of information that Jonathan and I are so excited to share with you, because reality truly is an illusion, and Dr. Hoffman is going to explain how we can better understand that and how it can change the way we lead our lives.
Right before we get to the episode, I'm going to ask a very, very quick favor. Please, wherever you're listening or watching, press subscribe right now. Here at Mayim Bialik's Breakdown, we are doing our very best to bring you the cutting edge of the intersection of science and spirituality. We are learning so much from these amazing guests, and it helps us to be able to bring you more episodes. We cannot thank you enough for being here, for listening week after week, and we are so excited to bring you more episodes like this to help change your life. So take a moment, subscribe, and on to the episode.
Without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Donald Hoffman to the Breakdown. Break it down.
Very, very good. Thank you.
You know, I think that the most powerful and gripping component of your book is literally in the preface. And what you tell us is that this book offers you the red pill, This is the red pill. This is the book that allows you to say, what if I submit to the notion that everything that I see and perceive and interpret is actually a projection of some sort. And we're going to need you to explain what is being projected, who's projecting it, why does it matter, and how does it change our lives?
Simple questions. Simple questions.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You are an esteemed academic and professor and thinker, and you didn't need to write The Case Against Reality, but you chose to, and we'd like to know why. What do you feel people are missing?
Well, there is an interesting revolution happening in science right now. It's quite stunning. The assumption that space and time are fundamental, or their combination, space-time, is fundamental, has been a very valuable and useful foundational idea for many, many decades, centuries actually. High energy theoretical physicists, though, have realized that space-time cannot be fundamental. It falls apart at the Planck scale. So we know exactly where it ceases to make sense. It doesn't make sense at 10 to the minus 33 centimeters and 10 to the minus 43 seconds. So it's not that, some cognitive scientist is saying we need to think out of the box. I'm just listening to what the physicists are saying, the high energy theoretical physicists, and they're saying we need to find a new framework that's outside of space-time. And they're going after it, right? There's the European Research Council has a 10 million euro initiative on these positive geometries beyond space-time that the physicists are now studying. So it's not like some maverick cognitive scientist is the first to say, hey, it's over for space-time. No, I'm cheering on what the high energy theoretical physicists have been saying for quite a while. But I'm saying, we need to look outside of physical categories perhaps now, space-time kinds of categories, and that's hard to do. I mean, this is requiring real big leaps. So what the physicists are finding are these positive geometries. They're just static objects. They're like monoliths outside of space-time, and their shapes and volumes code for particle interactions inside space-time. Remarkably, they actually give you the probabilities for various kinds of particle interaction. But why? It's anybody's guess about why these things are doing that and so forth. So we don't have a good framework of what's outside of space-time. I mean, that's the big question. If space-time isn't fundamental, first, what could that possibly mean? What could possibly be outside of space-time? That's the first question. Most of us go, space-time is the foundation of reality. What are you even talking about? So the physicists are saying, whatever space-time is, it falls apart at the Planck scale. So we have to find something outside of space-time, and it's anybody's guess what it is. Now, spiritual traditions, of course, have been there for thousands of years. They've been saying space-time is not, or space and time are the final reality. There's something well beyond space and time. And they've had techniques like meditation and so forth to help you to sort of transcend the notion of space-time. But so both sides have had a piece of the puzzle. The physicalists, the scientists, have had the rigor of mathematical models. And the spiritual people have had the idea that space and time aren't fundamental, that there's something deeper than that, but they've not had any mathematical tools. They've only had intuitive tools and so forth. And we can see this coming together historically with Galileo and the church, right? So here we have the clashing of the two world approaches, where the church, the Catholic Church at the time, said that they had the authority of miracles and that everybody should submit because they had the authority of miracles. And Galileo was saying, no, I've got mathematics and experiments, and mathematics and experiments overrule whatever you might claim on your authority. And so there's been this division ever since, right? Because the church put Galileo under house arrest. He died under house arrest, and he was forced to recant his scientific views about the Earth not being the center of the universe. Well, in retrospect, the church agreed they were wrong and they apologized, right? But it took 4 centuries or something like that for them to apologize. But science and spirituality really diverged then, and we've seen them go separate paths. And for a while, it was sort of, important to diverge because you really needed to establish something separate from authority. You needed to have math and experiments. But now we're at this interesting intersection where high energy theoretical physics is now saying, oh, we agree that there's something beyond space-time. And what is it? We're finding these positive geometries, these obelisks, but what do they mean? And the spiritual traditions still don't have any mathematical tools. So here's the position we're in. It seems like science has one part of the puzzle. We have mathematical models and we have experiments. This is how you make progress and really understanding things. The spiritual traditions say, we understand that there's something beyond space-time. And the physicists are now saying, yeah, I think there is something beyond space-time. How can we try to put these two pictures together? So that's where science is right now and where spirituality is. So to summarize, the spiritual traditions are outside of space-time, but there's no math and there's no experiments. Now, someone might say, well, yeah, there are experiments looking for like anomalous phenomena and so forth. And yeah, I have friends who are scientists who are looking for psi phenomena and so forth. But any hard-nosed scientist is going to say, experiments without a theory aren't going to move me very much. If you are doing these psi experiments and you're finding these anomalous results, I want you to first give me a theory that predicts the exact values of the anomalous results that you're getting. Otherwise, what can I say except maybe you made a mistake? If you have a theory that predicts something to the 8 decimal places and you get that 8 decimal place result, and then the scientific theories around can't do it, and a couple other labs replicate you, then of course scientists are going to pay attention, right? But just to say I've got something that doesn't fit in, they're not going to pay attention. So what the spiritual traditions and those thinking outside of space-time, idealists, for example, have lacked is a rigorous mathematical model that makes testable predictions outside, from outside of space-time. And what the physicalists understand now is we have to go beyond space-time, and they're doing rigorous mathematical models, but they don't know what they mean. These are positive geometries, but who ordered them, right? It's who ordered this. I want to get the best of both. I want to use absolute hard-nosed mathematical models and experiments from the scientific side, no nonsense. But I want to step outside of space-time and take the idea that consciousness is fundamental quite seriously. So that means no hand wave, give me a mathematical model of conscious experience, period. And with that mathematical model, give me exactly how space-time can arise. Again, precisely. So how does Einstein's Minkowski space, the flat space-time of Einstein come out of this? Or how does the curved space-time of Einstein come out of this in general relativity? And how does quantum mechanics come out of this? Because when space-time is doomed, so is quantum theory. Quantum fields, for example, are defined over space-time. So it's not enough to say, oh yeah, so we're going to go quantum on this. That's not enough. When you go quantum, you're still stuck with space-time. Quantum fields are defined over space-time. And if you're in non-quantum field theory, if you're just doing standard Schrodinger evolution, then you've got time as a parameter, an explicit parameter, and so you're stuck in time. So it's not enough to say we're going quantum. That gets you not out of space-time. So we have to really think out of the box, right? So space-time is doomed. Now I'm quoting physicists like Nima Arkani Hamed and David Gross. So this is not just a cognitive scientist saying this. I'm just quoting some high-energy theoretical physicists who say space-time is doomed. And they'll say explicitly that means quantum theory isn't fundamental either. So we have to go outside of space-time and quantum theory together. And that doesn't, so many of in the spiritual traditions who are trying to go to the next step are still holding on to quantum theory. And I'm saying, you hold on to quantum theory, you're holding on to a dead horse. You've got to go beyond quantum theory.
Mayim Bialik's breakdown is supported by Short Form.
We recommend a ton of books to you, our awesome listeners here on Mayim Bialik's Breakdown. Probably way more than you have time to read, if we're being honest. Sometimes it feels like more than we can read. Short form is the best way to learn ideas from all those books that you've always wanted to read. They're like book summaries on steroids. They don't just recap, they analyze them in a very detailed way, so you're getting the book's key points at a very deep level. Most summary apps are brief, like 10-minute AI-generated overviews that only cover what's on the surface of the book. Short form's team of writers and editors expertly craft in-depth coverage of all the most popular nonfiction titles. They also have interactive exercises to help you apply the ideas that you just learned so that you are less likely to forget what you just read. They add some smart insights, like connecting what one author thinks about another author. This helps us understand concepts at a deep level by building these connections between ideas. We use short form to help us go back and revisit books that we've discussed on the podcast that we're not done tackling. And if we have a guest coming up and it relates to something in another book, we know that short form is the easy, convenient way to get a comprehensive refresh. They have a wide variety of book genres to choose from in PDF and audio format, from health and well-being to productivity and communication. Short form publishes new book guides and articles every week. They even have guides just for podcasts, and subscribers get to vote on what books they cover, which is really cool. They're constantly adding new features to cover every idea across every medium out there. Their browser extension short form AI summarizes everything across the internet, from articles to YouTube videos with a click of a button. There's even a discussion community where readers can ask each other questions about the book. We love this feature. Actually reminds us of how we discuss episodes with our Substack community. Head to shortform.com/DMB for a free 3-month trial when you sign up for an annual subscription using our link. That's shortform.com/DMB.
Mayim Bialik's Breakdown is supported by Masa.
Did you know all chips and fries used to be cooked in tallow up until the 1990s, when big corporations switched to cheap processed seed oils? And today, seed oils make up 20% of the average American's daily calories. Recent studies have linked seed oils to metabolic health issues and inflammation in the body.
Masa decided to do something about it. They created a tasty and delicious tortilla chip with just 3 ingredients and no seed oils: organic nixtamalized corn, sea salt, and 100% grass-fed beef tallow.
These chips don't only avoid all the bad stuff. Jonathan says they taste incredible. Masa's crunchier, tastier, and sturdier than other chips, he says. They don't break in the guac.
Snacking on Masa chips is nothing like eating a regular chip. With Masa, you feel satisfied, light, energetic, with no crash or bloating or that gross, sluggish feeling afterwards. They're so much more satisfying than your average chip. I didn't even feel like I was uncontrollably binging or still feeling hungry afterwards.
What flavor do you like, Jonathan?
So this surprised me. The Cobanero, I thought it was going to be spicy, but it wasn't so spicy. I think it's going to be my go-to chip.
Ready to give Masa a try? Go to masachips.com/breakdown. Use code breakdown for 25% off your first order. That's masachips.com/breakdown, code breakdown for 25% off your first order. Don't feel like ordering online? That's okay. Masa's available nationwide at your local Sprouts supermarket. Stop by, pick up a bag before they're gone. Mayim Bialik's Breakdown is supported by Thrive Cosmetics. Fall is a special time in my house. It's when my cozy baking season begins, and the delightful spice scents of cookies and pastries are a simple, intentional way to make home feel like a cozy sanctuary. Small traditions that mark the changing of the season feel good, and that includes updating your makeup look. From a simple, just gotta get out the door routine to festive fall glam, Thrive Cosmetics is your go-to for completing any fall look. Every product's 100% vegan, cruelty-free, made with clean, skin-loving ingredients that work with your skin, not against it. We love that Thrive Cosmetics gives back to a ton of causes that are important to so many of us. With over $150 million in product and cash donations to 600 plus giving partners, your purchase directly fuels real impact, and that's beauty with purpose. One of my favorite Thrive products is their Liquid Lash Extensions Mascara. People ask, what is on your lashes? That's what it is. It's a vegan tubing mascara with over 40,000 5-star reviews. It's sweat-proof and has 6 shades, so you can choose, and they last all day without clumping, smudging, or flaking. It's easy to remove, slides right off with warm water without yanking out your natural lashes. Complete your fall look. Go to thrivecosmetics.com/MBB for an exclusive offer of 20% off your first order. That's Thrive Cosmetics, CAUSEMETICS.com/MBB.
In my book, The Case Against Reality, I'm proposing that the first step is to understand that space-time, from the consciousness point of view, space-time is just a headset. There's some reality outside of space-time and it's being filtered through a headset. So if that's the case, then there are certain things that we should expect. We should expect that objects don't exist when they're not perceived, right? And the reason for that is the following. Suppose that you're playing a virtual reality game like Grand Theft Auto, and you see in front of you a red Mustang that you're chasing, for example. Well, there is no red Mustang in the supercomputer that's running the game, right? If you look inside, there's diodes and resistors and voltages and so forth. There's no red Mustang in there at all. So where is that red Mustang? Where does it exist? I certainly see it. So I'm looking, I see a red Mustang. If I turn my headset that way, I no longer see it. And that's because I'm no longer rendering it. The pixels on my screen are no longer rendering something that I see as a Mustang, a red Mustang in front of me. So, but you can say, but every time you look back, you'll see it. Yeah, absolutely. Every time you look back, you'll see it. And the other players, if it's a multiplayer game, they'll all say, well, Don, look away from the red Mustang. I look away, and I can still see it, Don. So that proves that the red Mustang is really there. No, it just means that you're rendering it in your headset when I'm not rendering it in mine. So the first metaphor I propose in my book basically is to say, if you're having a hard time imagining what it could possibly mean that space-time isn't fundamental, here's the metaphor that will really help you. Think of it as a VR headset. Everything that you're seeing is a VR headset. And all the reasons that you might give for why it couldn't possibly be the case that I'm creating everything I see, just take it into a VR set context and ask your question there, and you'll realize that all the things that you think are drop dead proofs that you're seeing reality as it is just are not. So that's the real simple thing. So that's one of the big things I do in my book, is to just really help people to grasp with the virtual reality metaphor how it could be that when I'm not looking at the moon, you see the moon, and yet the moon doesn't exist when it's not perceived, right? So that really bothered Einstein. Einstein said, "Do you really believe the moon doesn't exist when when it's not perceived?" And most of us think that's a drop dead, stopping question for this whole approach. And the idea then is just simple. I render my moon when I look, and you render your moon when you look. And whatever reality is, it's not a moon. That's just your headset representation. Just like there's no red Mustang in the supercomputer. You render the red Mustang when you see it, and you don't render it when you don't. So that's the first step. It's a baby step, but it's the first step. I'm not yet talking about a scientific theory. I'm just trying to take the first baby step to get over the idea that this is impossible. You have to be nuts to even think this way. So we have to get over that hurdle before we can actually get into, here's how you build a scientific theory.
What did we do before there was Grand Theft Auto to use as a metaphor for reality? I'm thinking of all of the years before we had virtual reality, before we even had, this kind of video game world that was constructed. There's no better metaphor. And we had Dr. Rizwan Virk on, and, he basically said, this is a simulation, right? If you look at all of it like a simulation, that is the perfect metaphor. But it's so interesting, the millennia that it took, right, for us to get to this moment when we can actually use an example that people can grab onto to present some of the most sophisticated ideas in modern science. So I first wanted to give a shout out to virtual reality.
Right. Well, it's a good question. Plato was trying to grapple with this very idea, and he used the best metaphor he had at the time, which was not VR, of course. It was, he had his allegory of the cave.
That's right.
And the idea was that what we're seeing is just shadows of objects cast, so there's a fire going on, and there's objects behind the fire, and they're casting their shadows on a wall, and that's what you see are the shadows of objects. So we're not seeing reality, we're seeing the shadows of reality.
I've heard some people tell the allegory of the cave tale with the people being chained inside the cave.
Right.
They are chained to the reality of the cave, and all they see is their perception and their interpretation of shadows on the wall. However, what I would hold is that people like you, Donald Hoffman, are saying we can release those chains, and we can step outside of that cave now, and we can peer at the things that Plato only suggested that we could entertain. And for me, that's the largest revolution in science that we're able to experience right now as humans.
That's right. So we can unchain ourselves. And now, spiritual traditions have said that over millennia. They've said, well, you can unchain yourself with meditation and rituals and so for prayer and things like that. And that's good. And now I think we'll find in science, we'll find new ways to unchain ourselves, like theoretically, to say we can actually go outside of space-time with mathematics and theories that make predictions and make new technologies so that we actually no longer are hand waving about it. We're saying, this new technology is because something is beyond space-time.
Which is the reason Thomas Campbell says he does not have any interest in psychedelic drugs. He's like, the greatest drug is the understanding that we have, even when completely sober, of both the limits and the expansiveness of our perception and our reality.
What does it mean for someone in their everyday life to be chained to a false reality or to their perception? What does it look like to be stuck in that way if I'm trying to make this applicable to someone who's like, okay, I understand the concept. I understand the VR. I've heard a little bit about the fact that everything is either a simulation or a projection. What does that mean to me if I'm just going about my daily life?
Well, there's an emotional way of thinking about that and also an intellectual way. And I can maybe just briefly talk about both. On an emotional sense, I think I am my body, right? Because I think that objects in space-time are real, that they exist even when they're not perceived. So this is where it gets very personal. When I say the moon doesn't exist unless you perceive it, that also holds for your own body. Your body exists when you perceive it, and it doesn't exist when it's not perceived. So that's where now people start to say, okay, this is getting very, very weird, but that's where it's going to go. It leads to everything you see inside of space-time is your construction. None of it exists apart from your experiences. So on a personal level, to the extent that you're identified with your body, and by the way, I am. So this is a very, very deep psychological and emotional kind of attachment. And people who are in the mystical traditions will say that usually it takes many, many decades of intense meditation to let go of the illusion, that the chain, to use your Plato's phrase, the chain to our own bodies. So that's I chose that one because that's right there in your face. Everybody's chained to their bodies. I am chained to my body. And very, very few people escape those chains. And so, to the extent that I'm afraid about dying, for example, I'm in those chains. And so, I will confess I'm chained, right? So, on an emotional level, I'm chained. Intellectually, the chain is not being able to think what could possibly be beyond space-time. It's like I've actually given a talk where brilliant physicists or scientists that I know will ask me, what in the world are you even talking about? I can't even imagine what you're talking about, something beyond space-time. Space-time is reality. What could you possibly mean? So that's an intellectual chain, to not even be able to think outside of space-time. But again, high energy theoretical physicists are doing that now.
Well, I wonder if you can sort of give us a little bit of a primer here. When you talk about space, I think most people think like, oh, the stars, like, or maybe the Milky Way galaxy. And oh, I've heard that there are other galaxies. And when we talk about time, we think generally of a linear progression from birth to death and all of the things that we can perceive in that linear timeline. When you talk about space-time and you talk about it being fundamental, what does that mean practically?
Right. So to say that space-time is fundamental is to say that there is this physical world that we've seen that came into existence maybe 13.8 billion years ago at the Big Bang. And there was no consciousness to begin with, presumably at the Big Bang. There was just uh, high energies at high temperatures, right? And this thing is expanded and cooled down, And it's been going for all these billions of years, and it's now, as far as we can see, it's many tens of billions of light years across, at least what we can see. Perhaps it goes off to infinity, and maybe it cycles, maybe it collapses, and maybe there's some kind of expansion and contraction and so forth. But that's the whole story. Now, there is the multiverse kind of take on it. So maybe there's a bunch of different kinds of quote unquote space-times that have different dimensions and different properties and so forth. So there's that kind of possibility. But what we're saying now in the high energy theoretical physics is the very notion of space-time itself has no operational meaning. That means there are no experiments that you can do with it at beyond the Planck scale. All experiments are no longer sensible. So this is a really fundamental sense in which it no longer exists. And I can say why. So suppose that you're trying to measure something that's really, really small, right? So you need to have a good microscope. And the smaller it is, the more powerful your microscope needs to be. And what that means is you're using smaller and smaller wavelengths of light, or some kind of radiation, but I'll say light, but physicists use all kinds of radiation. And it has to have smaller and smaller wavelengths if you're going to resolve finer and finer details. And that's fine. In quantum theory, that's perfectly fine. You can just keep going smaller and smaller. But relativity theory is the problem. Einstein told us that mass and energy are the same thing. And quantum theory tells us that energy is proportional to the frequency. The smaller the wavelength, the higher the energy. So as we're using smaller wavelengths in more and more powerful microscopes, the energy is going up, and the energy density is going up because it's concentrated in a small area. And Einstein tells us, well, that means you're concentrating mass in a small area, and at some point, the mass density is so high that you create a black hole, and you actually destroy the very thing you're trying to observe. And this happens at 10 to the minus 33 centimeters and 10 to the minus 40 or 10 to the minus 43 seconds. And for me, that's very shallow. It's only 10 to the minus 33. It's not 10 to the minus 33 trillion centimeters. It's just 10 to the minus 33 centimeters. So we have a pretty cheap headset. The headset resolution only goes down to 10 to the minus 33 centimeters, and then it falls apart. So it really is, we're reaching, in some sense, the resolution limits of this space-time VR headset. And we actually know where it is. Now, that's the power, by the way, of science. And this is a really important thing about science. Einstein starts off with the assumption that space-time is fundamental, right? That's one of the fundamental ideas. And he gives us all this mathematics and quantum theory as well, assuming that the quantum fields are defined over space-time. You put them together, and they tell you the fundamental assumptions that we used to build these theories aren't the final word. That is what's so beautiful about science. They say, let's assume, for sake of argument, that space-time is fundamental. Then we will prove that space-time is not fundamental, and that it falls apart at exactly 10 to the minus 33 or roughly 10 to the minus 33 centimeters, 10 to the minus 43 seconds. That's the way wonderful science works. It says we always start with assumptions, like let's assume, Einstein said, let me assume that the speed of light is the same in all inertial frames and there's no special inertial frame. And then we get the structure of space-time coming up. So we start with the set of assumptions, but we know that we don't have a theory of everything because we started with assumptions and we're not explaining our assumptions. So every scientific theory starts with a miracle, or some miracles, we call them our assumptions, but they're the miracles of the theory. And what we say in science is, if you grant me these miracles, then I'll explain all this other wonderful stuff. And it works. I mean, all the technology that we're using right now to talk with each other via the internet and so forth, it wouldn't be here without quantum theory and Einstein's theories. They're beautiful theories. They work, but what's really powerful about them is they tell us where they stop. They say our fundamental assumptions of space and time that we built the whole theory on, those very assumptions aren't true, and they fall apart at 10 to the minus 33 centimeters. That's not self-refutation. That is beautiful science telling us what we knew had to be the case, that your assumptions aren't the final word.
Well, and I think the application of this is then everything that we construct, like if I'm thinking of lay people, right? I'm thinking of people who are not operating at high level nuclear physicist level, and they're not operating from the perspective of cognitive science or even from the perspective of philosophy, right? Like Bernardo Kastrup. When we operate in the world, you know, the hardest thing that many lay people have to decide is, do I believe in science or do I believe in God, right? And this conversation kind of places us squarely in the middle of it, because what we see is that science already knows the limits of what we can know, and religion already knows the limits of what we can know. But the question is there a place where those two things literally meet? And your answer is absolutely. And it comes from a place that is legitimate and respectable from a scientific perspective, as well as gratifying and satisfying, and also beautiful from this kind of spiritual notion, right?
Yes, so I should go in that direction now. But before I go there, because it's an important distinction, many simulation theories, what they'll say is that this isn't the reality. This is just a virtual reality from some program. There's some programmer at a different level of reality who's coding up some fancy thing in their computer, and you and me and this whole world we're seeing is just a VR in that. But then that programmer herself is just the virtual thing of some lower level program, and this turtles all the way down until you finally get to some base level. And I disagree with that. So at the base level, there's a physical space-time first. So none of these simulation theories say at the very base I'm going to have something beyond space-time. They say no, there's some physical space-time. The second thing they're assuming is that the computer programming can create consciousness at the next level, so that your consciousness is the result of computer programming, of some computer function. And I deny both. So my point of view is superficially like the simulation kind of theories, but it has very, very deep differences. Computers cannot create consciousness de novo from just the computational structure. No one has any idea how that can be, and I claim it can't be done. And if you're assuming that the fundamental simulation is at the base level in a space-time, then you're violating what the physicists are telling us, the high energy physicists are telling us. So I want to make a clean distinction between what I'm saying and the simulation theory.
Mayim Bialik's Breakdown is supported by Shopify. Shopify's already taken the cash register online, helping millions sell billions around the world. But did you know that Shopify can do the same thing at your retail store? Give your point of sale system a serious upgrade with Shopify. Shopify POS is your command center for your retail store. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify's got everything you need to sell in person. With Shopify, you get a powerhouse selling partner that effortlessly unites your in-person and online sales into one source of truth. Track every sale across your business in one place. Know exactly what's in stock. Connect with customers in-line and online. Shopify helps you drive store traffic with plug-and-play tools built for marketing campaigns from TikTok to Instagram and beyond. Get hardware that fits your business. Take payments by smartphone, transform your tablet into a point-of-sale system, or use Shopify's POS Go mobile device for a battle-tested solution. Plus, Shopify's award-winning help is there to support your success every step of the way. Do retail right with Shopify. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/breakdown, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/breakdown to take your retail business to the next level today. Shopify.com/breakdown. Mayim Bialik's Breakdown is supported by BetterHelp. As seasons change and days grow darker sooner, it can be a tough time for many. Fall, particularly as we enter the holiday season, isn't easy for everyone. It's important to stay connected. This November, BetterHelp is encouraging everyone to reach out, check in on friends, reconnect with loved ones, remind the people in your life that you're there. Just as it can take a little courage to send that message or grab coffee with someone you haven't seen in a while, reaching out for therapy can also feel difficult, but it's worth it. And it almost always leaves people wondering, why didn't I do this sooner? I'm also taking this as a reminder to reach out to some extended family members that I haven't connected with in a while. Therapy is something that we have decided we cannot live without, and especially during the holiday season, especially as fall starts reminding us the holiday season is coming, it's a great time to get acquainted with someone and start getting comfortable with sharing where you're at and what your needs are. BetterHelp therapists work according to a strict code of conduct and are fully licensed in the U.S. A short questionnaire helps identify your needs and preferences. If you aren't happy with who we match you with, switch to a different therapist at any time from tailored recommendations. Fully online, you can pause your subscription whenever you need to. Switch therapists anytime at no extra cost. With over 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp's the world's largest online therapy platform with over 5 million people served globally. It's convenient, too. You can join a session with a therapist at the click of a button, helping you fit therapy into your busy life. This month, do not wait to reach out. Whether you're checking in on a friend or reaching out to find a therapist yourself, BetterHelp makes it easier to take that first step. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/break. That's betterhelp.com/break. Mayim Bialik's Breakdown is supported by IQ Bar, our exclusive snack sponsor. IQ Bar is the better-for-you plant protein-based snacks made with brain-boosting nutrients to refuel, nourish, and satisfy hunger without the sugar crash. Their plant protein bars are packed with high-quality ingredients to help keep you physically and mentally fit. IQ Bar is totally free from gluten, dairy, soy, GMOs, and artificial sweeteners for a natural anytime snack. There are 9 delicious flavors to choose from. More people than ever are starting their days on the right foot with IQ Bar's brain and body boosting bars, hydration mixes, and mushroom coffees. I will tell you that Jonathan is starting his days, middays, and evenings off right with IQ Bars because that's when he eats them. The only bad thing about IQ Bar is the wrappers that I find everywhere. Jonathan loves his IQ Bars. And right now, IQ Bar is offering our special podcast listeners 20% off all IQ Bar products, plus get free shipping. To get your 20% off, text BREAKDOWN to 64,000. Text BREAKDOWN to 64,000. That's BREAKDOWN to 64,000. Message and data rates may apply. See terms for details. There's so much conversation right now that many of us don't know if we should be listening to or not about AI, about technology, about this fusion. You know, for those of us who are parents, we thought that the hardest thing we'd have to decide was, should my kid use ChatGPT to do their homework? And now the questions are we as humans more comfortable with communicating with an AI friend or an AI therapist than with another human? As artists, many of us are curious where our place is in a world where we're being told as actors, we are necessarily not needed in certain ways. As writers, you know, ChatGPT can do things that I can't as a writer. You know, I think many people are sort of feeling confused. You know, are there special pockets of our conscious experience that we cannot leave to AI?
Great. Yeah, it's a good question. So the current AIs are these large language models. And yeah, I use them. I use ChatGPT and Perplexity and so forth. And they're very, very helpful. But I also know how to ask them questions that reveal that they're dumber than cucumbers.
Give me an example.
They don't understand what they're doing. They get confused, and I actually have to, when I'm having them edit manuscripts, they will do like bloopers all the time. Bloopers that I wouldn't expect, you know, a high school student to do. And I'll get these bloopers, and I sometimes have to have them go 4 or 5 iterations before I get something that I finally say is free of dumb errors. So what they're good at is finding correlations. They're really good at they can read lots of material and find correlations, and that's what I use them for. Is that, I mean, before I had to do literature searches myself, and it was very, very hard. And they've done all the literature search, but that's not intelligence. That's just mass memory, right? And then good searching procedures. Now there are new approaches. There's an active inference kind of approach that Carl Friston and others are doing, which would be a next generation of artificial intelligences, which I think are going to get closer to what we might call intelligence than large language models. Large language models are just correlation devices, effectively, and they're very, very useful. And I'm paying for them, so I'm for it. But I'm not too worried about them being smarter than me. I am impressed that they have more memory than me, but that's not a big deal. We sort of knew computers could do that for a long, long time.
Well, yeah, I'm actually trying to think of all the times in my life that someone's been like, "You're so smart," and usually I just say, No, I'm just holding a lot of information. I'm making a lot of associations, or like I really love words and grammar. So if you ask me the difference between two words that many people would subtly interchange, I've got a really deep understanding of, nope, those words are not the same thing. But what makes me me? What makes me a conscious person? What makes me able to generate emotional intelligence and connections? Those are not things that I plan to outsource, right?
Right, and I don't think we have to worry about AIs being conscious in that kind of sense. That, as I said earlier with the simulation theory, I don't think that computational systems can de novo give rise to consciousness. This is just not right. Now they can give rise to behaviors that we enjoy, that are helpful and intelligent in certain ways. That's perfectly fine. But I'll put it this way: there is no scientific theory to date at all that can say for any specific conscious experience, like the taste of mint or the smell of chocolate or something, that what specific computational procedure must give rise to that experience. So if anybody says that AIs can be conscious, just ask them the very, very simple question. Okay, well, we have trillions of conscious experiences. It should be like shooting fish in a barrel. Pick one and give me your theory. Tell me exactly how a computer or some physical system could give rise to that conscious experience. This is now where I'm interested in science, not hand wave. If you think that's true, give me a mathematically precise account of one conscious experience. And I will tell you, I know the field, I know the players. They're my friends and colleagues. They're brilliant, and they can't give you a single one. Not because they're dumb, it's because it can't be done. It's just simply the case that conscious experiences do not arise out of physical processes. And so that's the simple question to ask anybody. You think conscious experiences arise from physical systems like computers? Give me one theory that science has done, like the taste of mint or the smell of garlic. Give me one. Until you have one on the board, there's nothing to take. There's literally nothing to talk about. You have no theory. So there's no science. Now we have now they'll say, well, no, Don, we've done all these neural correlates of consciousness. I mean, you're a cognitive neuroscientist. Don't you know about all the? Absolutely. I've been involved in these neural correlate studies myself, fMRI and EEG and so forth.
You can even go down to the electrophysiological level, meaning we know what is happening on a sodium and potassium level
Absolutely.
for many of these things. And we know what's happening on a voltage level for many of these things, right? This is an action potential. This is a firing, right? When you think of what we didn't used to know about, for example, multiple sclerosis that we now know, right? We know so many things about what at the time that I chose my major was, this is the smallest unit of understanding about the human conscious experience that we can have, right? The neuron, the voltage, right? So we can even know it at that level. And I have a colorblind son, it wasn't until I started thinking about what he sees versus what I see and what he perceives and what we call things and just the nomenclature, and when he was little and we'd go to a restaurant and, they have those kids coloring mats that they give out. And he would say to me, give me the brown for the tree trunk. And I would say, whichever one looks brown to you is brown. And he said, no, I want it to be what other people perceive as brown, right? Like, what an interesting shift in perception, right, that we can have.
Very, very interesting, yes.
We recently spoke to a staunch materialist who
is on the back of your book. It's Steven Pinker.
Yeah, we're good friends.
We should have a debate because his perspective, when it came up, the question came up, is consciousness in the brain created by physical processes in the brain or outside of the brain in a larger consciousness system, which, can bridge us into spirituality. His perspective was, we know neurosurgeons who have opened the brain of people who are awake and tapped different parts of the brain and created feeling, emotion, and even visual experience. So from his perspective, everything is hardwired in the brain, and what are you talking about, you silly non-materialists? Like, you don't know what you're talking about.
He basically called us hippies.
And that we think silly things. So how, from your perspective, is that wrong or misguided?
Well, Steve is a good friend, and he's helped me many, many times over the years. So I have only good things to say about Steve, and he's brilliant. So first, I would say, of course, there are all these neural correlates of consciousness, absolutely, and we should study them. And I'll make it even stronger. We know that recording from certain areas of the brain, I can predict in certain experiments several seconds before you know what you're going to do, what you're going to do, what you're going to choose, for example, to do, or when you're going to do it. So, but these correlations, and Steve would know this. I mean, he knows this, that correlation doesn't at all entail causation. It's just that simple. So, I mean, so the standard example that we give is, for example, rooster crows are correlated with sunrise. They but that doesn't mean that rooster crows cause the sunrise. They're correlated, but that doesn't quite get to the one I got earlier, which is, I can know from brain activity several seconds before you know what you're going to experience or think and so forth. So how do you deal with that one? Well, think about it again this way. At a train station, you see a crowd of people, a few hundred people gather several minutes before a train comes. But if I see the people crowding there, I can predict that there's going to be a train with high probability that there's going to be a train.
But part of that is, from what we know of what happens in in the premotor cortex, all of that simply means that our observation of action is not the same measurement that activity is actually occurring on. There's nothing magical going on, right? It's just that what we can perceive is, quote, later than the activity in the brain. So I can kind of explain that one away, but I understand that before we understood premotor cortex and all these things, we assumed that everything that we're experiencing is happening in this space and in this time, when that's actually not accurate. So we can kind of explode that concept out to really any form of measurement or perception, is what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the key thing is to think of the brain itself as just a virtual reality system that we're looking at, and we can play with that VR system. And the space-time headset that we have is so sophisticated that it's giving us some clues about how the headset is being generated, right? So I'm saying that space-time isn't fundamental. It's just a VR headset. There's some deeper reality that engineers this headset, that gives us this headset view out on the deeper reality.
So that's where we kind of need to go, because the first thing I think of is when people do high doses of psilocybin, they get in touch with something outside this realm. They experience ego death. They experience, leaving the body, not just psilocybin, but I don't need to list all the amazing, substances that exist. But also, I'm going to go ahead and Terrence McKenna you. When people take DMT, they claim to see elves that they say are actually running the entire show. And that once the headset is removed, we see that, it's literally a mechanistic thing where these little elves are like programming everything. Do I need to believe that elves are existing and programming this reality? I don't know.
Well, no, I'm a hard-nosed scientist. It may not sound like it when I'm talking about taking off this headset, but I'm very, very hard-nosed scientist about these things.
No, and I'm not being facetious. I'm literally saying that for a lot of people who are seriously in this field, they say, guess what? We know how to remove the headset. Yes, you can get there with deep meditation, but the universe has given us these incredible compounds that quiet down all of the noise of, like, how do I look today? And why is she saying that? And what if this? And what happens when I die? What if it's like, guess what? We're all just like a floating collective consciousness, and there are little elves.
Right. So my attitude about it. So I was very hard on the scientists just a moment ago by saying, give me a specific theory for a specific conscious experience. You can't do it? Okay. Come back when you've got something of interest. Now I'll do the same thing to the spiritual sides, right?
I was going to say, now the spiritualists are going to get it.
Right. So the spiritual sides have been at this for thousands of years, and they've had all these interesting phenomena and so forth. And they've said for thousands of years that space and time are not the fundamental reality. Consciousness is the fundamental reality. So that means that they owe us, ultimately, a theory of what's outside of space-time and how it gives us Einstein's space-time. So what is your theory of consciousness?
The spiritualists don't owe you anything, though. The spiritualists would say we are so outside of this space-time fundamental conversation that we don't even exist in a plane where there is the kind of proof that science even needs, right? There's that branch of spiritualists, too.
I'll put it this way. This is maybe just a functional fact. If you want people to take you seriously in this age, you need to do something to show that this isn't. We have lots of evidence of hoaxes and mistakes and illusions from the spiritual side. I'm not saying it all is, but some of it is, and we don't know how much of it is. So what we need from that side is a theory that says this is a spiritual reality outside of space-time, or at least a description of a first level. I mean, I empathize and agree with spiritual traditions that say that ultimately reality transcends description. That's perfectly fine. But then they go on and give descriptions about elves and so forth. So if you're going to give descriptions, then as a modern person, I demand descriptions that make sense, that make predictions. I have no interest in any descriptions except as a stimulation to the ideas to get to a deeper theory. But I want a theory that gives me, for example, Einstein's special theory of relativity. I want the length contractions and time dilations so you start with consciousness, you give me space-time, and you give me exactly the Lorentz transformations. If you do that, doesn't mean you're right, but at least now you're on the field. You're playing the game that makes you of interest. And so if you can start with a spiritual framework and give me quantum field theory or general relativity, something like that, mathematically, then I'm interested. And until then, I will listen to your ideas with respect, but there's no science on the table. You've given me no, so I'm not going to take your thoughts as a scientific theory. I'll take them as perhaps inspirations that might lead to a scientific theory, but you're not playing the game yet. The game is give me the mathematics that makes the predictions.
And I appreciate that. And I think, and also I'm not speaking on behalf of, spiritualists. And I think it's important to discuss. This came up a lot when the telepathy tapes kind of swept the nation, and, Joe Rogan in particular, brought the telepathy tapes to many people's, kind of consciousness, as it were. One of the things, that Jonathan and I find challenging and we're excited, to continue to tackle is, with all due respect, I do understand that if people believe that they have an understanding, right, of something that is outside of this realm, like so outside of the realm that they have either had direct experience or they believe that they have collected enough anecdotal stories to form a belief system. This is where I think we get this tremendous divide, because you do get people who say, I am operating so far outside of this reality that even the words you're using, asking me to come up with a theory and an equation, it doesn't obey that, right? And for me, this is the most interesting part of the conversation that we're having, is
Right.
How do we take people who would say that any formulaic, any study, any double blind, any placebo conversation, the rules of something outside of this fundamental space-time existence simply do not apply, right? So when people say, oh, if someone can do remote viewing, we'd all be doing it and everyone would win the lottery. That's not true, because that's assuming that if one person can do something, everyone can do it. And what happens with psi phenomenon is we may be witnessing a different kind of evolutionary favoring of certain skills, certain perceptions, certain openings that may not obey the kind of rules of a double-blind Kaiser study.
Right. Well, so that's a very good point to bring up. And I would say the following, so someone might say, I'm having these experiences, telepathy and so forth, outside of space, time and so forth. My first attitude would be, okay, great. I mean, I'm open to listening to these kinds of things as stimulations for ideas, for scientific theories. But if they then go on and say, okay, but this transcends any particular science, and there's no point in trying to go beyond space and time, and they say you won't be able to do it, then my attitude is, okay, that is a prediction. You're saying we won't be able to do it, so let's try. And if we actually come up with a theory, a mathematical theory of consciousness, which we know is not the final word, but it is a step of consciousness outside of space-time, and it does give us space-time back, then you were wrong. So there is a way to falsify their position, which is to get a theory, a first step of consciousness outside of space-time that does predict the structure of science, in which case then I would then have to say that I would distrust the rest of their intuitions. Now, I wouldn't discard them, but I wouldn't trust them. So I think the bottom line from that line of argument is to say, they may be right. The only way we'll find out is if we try to give a mathematical theory of consciousness outside of space-time. And if we get one that works, then those who said that they knew it couldn't be done were flat wrong.
Great. That's really helpful.
Now, they may still have insights that we want to listen to, but that particular claim of theirs would be flat wrong. So we'll see. I think we'll be able to do it, and I don't think it'll be that hard, frankly, to start with a theory of consciousness and get Einstein's special relativity and general relativity coming out of it.
And this is what you're working on, right?
Right.
Can you describe why it is maybe evolutionarily that more people haven't had access to this? Because what we've seen from near-death experience, what we know from psilocybin and other psychedelics, what we know from deep meditation is that it used to be believed that the brain actually had to work harder to perceive more, but really what's happening is the brain has to quiet down to perceive more of quote-unquote reality. Can you explain why it is that maybe more people have been on a path to survive versus experience what is outside of space and time?
Yes, it is interesting that when you take these drugs, often it's sort of relaxing certain things of the brain, as opposed to so it's almost like the brain is shielding you away from some aspects of reality, cutting it down somehow, which is an interesting point of view, and that does fit with you might claim that it's just a headset. The headset is in some sense a way of taking something that's really complicated and putting it right. For example, in the Grand Theft Auto game, you're dealing with some computer that what you're really doing is toggling millions of voltages in a precise order in a very, very quick time to turn your steering wheel and hit the gas and so forth. That's what you're really doing in this analogy. If you had to actually toggle those voltages, good luck. That's too much reality. So all you want to see is a little steering wheel and a dashboard and a red Mustang. You don't want to toggle the millions of volts. So in some sense, yeah, space-time is something that's sort of filtering out most of reality. And so when you take a drug that starts to break down the filter, you might get little glimpses out. So it does make sense in that framework. Absolutely.
Talk a little bit about human evolution in terms of why, obviously we are wired for all sorts of experiences. And when we learn what we can learn from indigenous communities who in many cases remain very, very linked to the earth, to the seasons, to our place in the universe, there's a real leaning into that. But by and large, what we see is this tendency away from that for survival, for a selection of mates, for a propagation of the species. Can you talk about why evolution favors not being in touch all the time with this level of, spiritual consciousness outside of this reality and where it fits in?
So now I'm going to talk, I'll be very explicit about the context at which I'm going to talk. So now I'm going to be inside space-time. I'm going to assume Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection, right? So that's my framework now. And I'm going to talk about what that theory entails. Now, it's a brilliant theory, and inside space-time, if you want to talk about organisms and their behaviors, there is no better theory than Darwin's. So I first want to give kudos to Darwin's theory, and especially evolutionary game theoretic descriptions of it. So it's wonderful. I've used it all in consulting with companies for marketing and advertising. It works. It's very, very powerful theory. Now, most people think Darwin's theory is going to entail that, it's survival of the fittest, and of course the fittest are those who see the truth, right? If you don't see the truth, you're not going to be very fit. So of course we've evolved to know reality, or at least the parts of reality that we need. Maybe not all of reality, but we need to see some parts of reality accurately to survive and compete. And when you look at Darwin's theory carefully in evolutionary game theory, you find, and by the way, Steven Pinker has a wonderful paper in 2005 titles. So how does the mind work? I think is the title of the paper. I highly recommend it. Steve gives several reasons for us to understand how evolution could lead us away from veridical understanding of the world. So that I recommend people to read Steve's paper on that. So, but I'll just say the work that I've done with my colleagues that sort of really puts the nail in the coffin here is we look at the mathematics of evolutionary games, and there's something called a fitness payoff, right? So a payoff is, suppose I'm hungry and I want to eat, and I'm a human being. If I eat a piece of broccoli or I eat an egg, that's very, very good. If I eat a poisonous mushroom, that's bad news. That's not. So there's what we call a fitness payoff. There's a human being with an action I want to eat, and in a context like that, I have a nasty mushroom that could kill me, or I have a piece of broccoli that would be helpful to me. I'm going to get a payoff if I choose the mushroom versus the broccoli. So and that's what fitness payoffs are. They're sort of, you pick an organism like Hoffman, an action like eating, and a context, like there's a mushroom, poisonous mushroom, so forth. So you can look at these fitness payoffs, and what we showed was payoff functions do not have any information about the structure of the world. That's the key point about faith. There's nothing in evolutionary theory that requires payoff functions to code any structure of the world. For example, metric structure, or order, partial order structures, any kind of mathematical structures. Any payoff, when you look at evolutionary game theory, it puts no limits on the payoff functions. Pick your payoff function. It doesn't say this is the class of payoff functions that are allowed in evolutionary theory. No, it just says there's some payoff function.
So wait, can you say this in normal people terms? Meaning, right, like if I eat the broccoli, it's good for me. There's not a limit to how much broccoli I can eat, nor is there a limit to how much the broccoli can be good for me. Am I heading in the right direction?
Yes, but this is a little bit subtler in the sense that it's saying that the payoff functions don't necessarily have to know anything about the true nature of the world at all.
What I instantly thought of was like a pigeon getting a reward in an experiment, right?
Right.
So, or actually, I know more about these with rats. So, if you give a rat, an opioid or cocaine, it will keep taking it. The rat will keep doing that until it dies, right? Like it will keep doing that until it has a little rat aneurysm. The payoff itself does not know this is enough for the rat. That's enough methamphetamine for you, experimental rat. There's no larger consciousness of what this particular payoff means for that rat.
Exactly. In some sense, you found a little problem in the whole design of the rat, because that's the reward system, and so you keep giving positive stuff to the reward system, and says, oh well, I'll keep doing that until it falls apart.
Right, and the universe doesn't have a larger wisdom of like, or even if you think about food, I studied Prader-Willi syndrome, right? People with Prader-Willi syndrome lack a satiety mechanism, so they will keep consuming, right? And that means that whatever system we are existing in does not know, well, this person has a deletion on that chromosome and it's not going to allow them.
It's also been described that we have been programmed fundamentally to reproduce and to survive, and that the nature of reality is something unimportant to us up until this point. But perhaps there is a transition moment in either the larger consciousness system, if one believes in that, or humans evolution, the state of that we find ourselves in, that now is somehow different, that we are looking behind the veil, looking behind the headset, trying to better understand what that means. And this would lead to your work, but also to the question of why now in human evolution is it important for us to look behind the veil and see more about the reality? Perhaps it is that it is important for our survival as a species to know more.
It's quite possible. If I try to stay within the context of evolutionary theory, though, for just a moment, just to look at its implications, because I think where you're going there is going to require a broader framework to go that direction. But so let's go right back to just evolutionary theory for a moment. I think one simple thing to say about it is the more calories you spend to do something, more calories you have to eat. So you're trying to do things as cheaply as possible. I love this example of the jewel beetle. This is a concrete example. So the jewel beetle is dimpled, glossy, and brown. The males fly, the females are flightless. And the males go around searching for females, flying around looking for, and if they find an eligible female, they alight and mate. These are out in the outback of Australia. And for a while there, some guys in Australia had these beer bottles called stubbies that were also dimpled, glossy, and brown, just like the beetles are. And they were tossing their empty beer bottles out into the desert. And what happened was that these beer bottles are what we call a supernormal stimulus. The male were just flying to the bottles and alighting on them and then trying to mate. And so the jewel beetle males they would swarm all over these stubbies and they had full body contact, and they still couldn't figure out that they were not on a real female. So here's the case, the males.
There's so many jokes in my 14-year-old brain that are like roaming around. I will save all of them for you later, Jonathan.
That's right, but here's the case. This is how much insight males have into the females, right? They're mistaking them.
That's not the girl for you, says your mother.
Yeah, that bottle is the girl for you. So you might go, well, wait a minute. I mean, the male beetles had successfully mated with females for millennia. And all you need is to throw a beer bottle out in the desert and the whole game could be over. So those males had no insight into what a real female was. Literally no insight. A bottle will do. And it turned out the bigger the better, apparently. So it was all sorts of jokes here. So that gives you an insight as to what evolution does. It gives what we call satisficing solutions. They're good enough to keep you alive. So instead of so satisficing means they're not perfect, but they're good enough to keep you alive. And all you need to know about a female, apparently, is she dimpled? Is she glossy? Is she brown? Go for it. And if she's big, hey, the bigger the better. So, and beer bottles do that. So there you go. So they didn't learn the truth. They got a little hack. They're going through, and that's what evolution does. It gives us these little simplified hacks, not the truth. But someone might say, well, that's just, for example, my advisor, David Marr at MIT, was well aware that, probably flies only had hacks. But he said, but humans we have bigger brains, and we've evolved to see the true shapes of surfaces around us. And I love David. He was an incredible advisor, and he's a brilliant man. On this point, I respectfully disagree with him.
I want you to keep walking this through in terms of Jonathan's evolutionary question, because, a lot of people would say, well, we're humans and we're very, very special. We're even more special than other primates, right? We speak and we have all of this amazing thing, and we can create devices to examine our own consciousness, and we can create Grand Theft Auto, right? And we can create all of these amazing worlds that those beetles never have to live in. And so we can create religion if we want to, right? We can create corporate financial structures surrounding God, and that makes us more powerful than God, right? However, there is this other consciousness, which I believe is truth with a capital T, how do we get from this evolutionary way of thinking to an understanding that, guess what, as your book talks about, this is all a very, very beautiful, interesting, complicated illusion of our own perception?
For those who say that humans have all this advanced, sophisticated abilities, I say we do, and let's use them right now in our evolutionary arguments. So let's use those advanced abilities to understand Darwin's theory. And the mathematics of Darwin's theory says there are these, payoff functions, and they shape your sensory systems. They shape your behavior. They shape the structure of your sensory systems. If you want to claim that our sensory systems have been shaped by evolution to see the truth, then the payoff functions must have information about that truth. They must be this is a technical term, they must be homomorphisms of the structure of the world. So whatever true structures there are in the world, they have to be not lost by the payoff functions, because the payoff functions are the things that are guiding the evolution of our senses. And when you just look at current evolutionary theory and you ask it, so what restrictions do you put on these payoff functions? And there's none. There's no part of the theory that says this is the class of payoff functions that you must use. They just say there is some payoff function. Figure it out, whatever it might be in your context. Given that, I have to consider the set of all possible payoff functions. And so we do that, and we published a couple of papers. This is with Chetan Prakash, a mathematician. This mathematics, I can have ideas in this area, but I can't prove them. But Chetan can. And what we published, and with some other co-authors, is proof that essentially the probability is zero that a randomly chosen payoff function will have any information about the structure of reality. So this is why I'm being very, very careful. I'm saying, let's look at Darwin's theory and its current framework. Darwin's theory in its current formulation in evolutionary game theory puts no restriction on the payoff functions. Okay. When I look at the payoff functions, I ask, what percentage of them could tell me about the truth? 0%. 0% of the payoff functions could shape me to see the truth. So I conclude on current Darwin's theory, the probability is zero that any sensory system has ever been shaped to see the truth. Now, you might say, well, we should change the theory. Please do. Good luck. It's not easy to change Darwin's theory. And what you'd have to do is give us a principled reason why you pick this set of payoff functions. What set of payoff functions are you going to choose? What's the principled reason for it?
When you think about like symbiotic relationships, and when you think about, what it means to be part of a community, right? Which a lot of people would say, oh, religion helps you be part of a community, and then you do good, and then you get, not my particular religion, but, then you get redeemed, right? And you get saved, right? That's our way of trying to place kind of a truth, right, on a payoff function. So, and, this is true of every organized religion, as my teenager was reminding me this holiday season. Anytime someone's passing a basket, right, in your church, in your synagogue, right, you're engaging in a social experiment of what does it cost, right, to be part of a system that tells you we have the truth. So what is the other side of this? So if this is the Darwinian way and the sort of evolutionary game theory way of saying, no, the sensory systems did not evolve for us to have any understanding about truth, what would you say about especially traditions that are thousands of years old that say, oh, God has been talking to us this whole time. We just have forgotten how to listen, right? Because we're so consumed with buildings and cars and things like that. Is that possible, that there was a time, or am I just romanticizing, am I Margaret Meading it? Am I just sort of romanticizing the time when, life was simpler and then everybody was spiritual and it was all just like kumbaya all the time? Is that a possibility for evolution that technology then has interfered with?
I think, again, Steven Pinker has done some research on this that's quite interesting. And he's got some books where he looks at this, and the idea that the noble savage kind of idea. But he's done a really good job to make the point that in some sense, with the evolution of modern societies, the actual per capita homicide rates have gone down. And so we're actually we look at World War I and II with horror and so forth, but when you look at the big picture, Pinker points out that in fact with modern societies, the Enlightenment values that have really led to modern society and a great lessening of human suffering and so forth. So yeah, I don't. Now, there could, of course, be individuals in the past. I mean, Jesus and Buddha and perhaps Muhammad and so forth that were individual examples of wonderful lifestyles. But if you look at the history of religion itself, it's not that great, right? There's lots of wars have been done in the name of religion. Galileo was imprisoned, wrongly. So we have to be very, very careful. That's why I want science and religion to work.
Yeah, I'm talking sort of let's go before 1000. You know what I mean? Like I'm talking like very like old school.
Right. My guess is that if you look back there, you're going to find all sorts of evidence of pretty nasty behavior of humans to humans.
Yeah, no, and I wasn't trying to sort of candy coat that. I'm just saying that it's interesting that conversations about truth that we're having in modern times about stepping outside of a scientific framework and stepping into a more spiritual kind of opening, that is in the literature of many religious traditions for thousands of years. And, I come from the Jewish tradition. The Kabbalists were very, very dialed into many things that the Greeks were also dialed into in terms of, pre-death practices and meditative states and really like tripping outside of this consciousness. Even some of the meditation that was done that we know about from thousands of years ago, it was practicing ego death. It was practicing leaving your body, right?
Yeah, no, I think that there has been a lot of that, and a lot of it I think was very insightful. And there were individuals, probably that at the foundations of various religions who really, in some sense, had taken off the headset more than most everybody had, and they were seeing beyond. And then the followers hadn't taken off their headset, and you get the thing devolving, right? So that seems to be the pattern. You have a Buddha, and things are great for a while, and then it devolves. You have Jesus, and things devolve.
It's always the publicists and the managers who make the trouble.
Yeah, it's up to each of us to take off our own headset, and so I think that it has been done in the past, but when you look at the history, I see individuals that took off the headset and learned love your neighbor as yourself really is the deepest thing that you could do, because your neighbor is yourself. The headset illusion that I'm separate from you is the fundamental illusion. I'm not separate from you. There's a deep consciousness that's looking at itself through a Hoffman avatar and a Jonathan avatar and a Mayim avatar and so forth.
Can you talk a little bit about what, collective consciousness is one of these phrases that gets thrown about in a lot of, as you call it, the hand-wavy communities. But can you talk about what it might be like to picture exactly what you said in a practical and very grounded way? What does it mean to say that part of the reality that we construct is that we are separate from one another?
Right. So this gets into the theory I'm working on right now. And the context, one context for it is, I'll go back to physics a little bit. The physicists know that they don't have a theory of the observer. They know that observations are really critical. They're central in physics, right? You do an experiment to give information to an observer. That's why you do experiments, is so that observers will have information. And without experiments and observations, there's no foundation to your science. But if you look, Newton didn't have a theory of the observer. He just assumed the observer effectively didn't affect anything. Einstein talks about observers, but they're just coordinates and clocks. That's all an observer. Quantum mechanics, now the observer is front and center, because you have one evolution when there's no observer, and then a different evolution, a collapse, when there is an observer. But quantum theory is very, very clear that they don't have a theory of the observer. That's really a big open thing. That, and Frank Wilczek, for example, a Nobel Prize winner in physics, says we need a theory of the observer. That's what we absolutely have to have, a theory of the observer. And some, you might say, well, this is a little technical aside. Decoherence will do it, and I'll just say no, it won't. It gives you it gets rid of the complex amplitudes, but it only gives you real probabilities, but doesn't give you a unique answer. We need a unique outcome, and you can't get a unique outcome from the Schrodinger evolution or decoherence. So bottom line, that was technical aside for those who would want to take me down. I just put that out there for those. For everybody else, quantum theory doesn't have a theory of the observer, and it's a well-known problem. And so it's in that spirit that I'm trying to propose a theory of the observer, right? So what do we mean by a theory of the observer? And this is with work with Chetan Prakash and Schwapon Chattopadhyay and others, and Robert Prentner, where we have a model of what we call conscious agents. So these are entities that are conscious, and so we're not just yet talking about one consciousness. We're talking about a bunch of interacting consciousnesses, right? So we have and the simplest. We don't want to do mathematics here, but I'll just
speak for yourself, Donald.
Okay, I'll do a little bit of mathematics, just a little bit. So for those who know that we use Markov chains to describe Markov matrices to describe observations. The idea is very, very simple. Suppose you're at a stoplight and you can see red, green, and yellow lights. And if I'm seeing red now, good chance that I'll see green next, not yellow. And if I see green now, good chance I'll see yellow next and not red. And so forth. If I see yellow, I'll see red next, but not green. So that's just an example, given a current kind of experience that I'm having, like red, I can talk about probabilities of what I'm going to see next, yellow or green, and so forth. I can write down a matrix of these numbers. And a matrix of numbers, if I see red now, the probability is 1 that I'll see green next, for example. Those are called Markov matrices. So it's very, very simple. It just describes if given my experience right now, what other experiences might I have next and with what probabilities? That's all I use, just Markov matrices to describe conscious experiences. So notice I'm assuming conscious experiences. I'm not starting with physics and saying, I'll give you a physical system in a brain, for example, or a computer that's going to generate conscious experiences. I'm saying, no, my theory starts with experiences. I'm going to start with experiences, but if you grant me that, then I will show you how space-time, Einstein's space-time, emerges. So it's a different game, right? That's starting outside of space-time with consciousness in a particular mathematical model of consciousness, and saying, if you grant me that there are experiences, consciousness, and if you grant me this mathematical model of them, a pretty simple one, that I'll have an experience, and then there's going to be some probability I'll have some other experience. That's all I'm assuming. So humans can have trillions of experiences. There's literally trillions that we could have. So it's a big matrix, a trillion by a trillion matrix of numbers, for example, about the experiences that you might have. But if you grant me that, then the claim is I can show you how space-time arises. The way it arises, this is just something we just discovered in the last year. And I've been working on this. I have a book on called Observer Mechanics that was published in 1989. So I've been working on this for a little while. I started working on that book like in 1986 or something like that. So it's been 40 years I've been working on this, but it just broke in the last year. And what we discovered was there's a logic on these Markov chains that no one's ever seen before. We call it the trace logic. And I can describe it intuitively, but I'll just say what it does. It turns out that these different conscious observers are related by a logic. And this logic tells you how to take two conscious observers and say, can they be combined? And if so, how do they combine? What is the new, bigger conscious observer that they form? And this is not a hand wave. This is mathematics. This is a theorem about Markov chains. So this is a theorem about Markov chains. And when we interpret Markov chains as representing conscious experiences, it then becomes a theorem about how consciousnesses relate. And this logic has no top. There's no top to it. There's an infinite number of directions that you could go bigger and bigger with bigger and bigger Markov matrices with more and more experiences. So it even expands my idea of what I could possibly mean by God. There's not just like one infinite, there's an infinite number.
What this is suggesting is that there is some sort of logic to a collection of consciousness,
Exactly.
which many people might call collective consciousness.
Exactly.
And that it has, it has no end, which, just to bring this in, one of the names of God in Hebrew is there is no end. So that's a nice little tie-in. And the idea is that there is no end to the collection of consciousness that can essentially be logically deduced.
That's right. There's an infinite number of directions that you could go infinitely far. So it's not like there's just one infinity. There's an infinite number of infinities of different directions that you could go.
I love when people accidentally prove God. I told Thomas Campbell that I think he accidentally proved that God exists when he talked about entropy. To me, this is a notion of not accidental, but a mathematical explanation of what it might mean to have consciousness that is connected and then collected together.
It is. And so I want to, of course, say what it can do, but I should immediately be modest about this. It's a scientific theory, and I agree with the spiritual traditions that ultimately consciousness transcends description. So reality, whatever it is, transcends description. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't build mathematical models. We should, as long as we're humble and we say this is just the next. So all I'm claiming is this, I think, is the first baby step outside of space-time. It's not a final theory of consciousness, but it is a theory. It is a baby step theory of consciousness that doesn't assume that it arises from physical stuff inside space-time. Instead, as I'll talk about in a minute, it shows how the structure of space-time emerges from the logic of all these consciousness. But ultimately, what it means is that they're all one. They're all connected by this logic, each separate subset. So all possible, there's a consciousness associated with each possible subset of experiences. So there's an infinite number of experiences, and take any collection of them, there's a conscious agent for that, and there's an infinite number of subsets of this logic that are Boolean. So this is a little technical, but the logic itself is not Boolean. The Boolean logic is a very, very simple kind of logic. This is a non-Boolean logic, but for every one of these big matrices, underneath it, if you look at all the consciousnesses that are related to that, they are Boolean. So you get this non-Boolean logic that's locally Boolean. And again, I'm not saying this is the final story about consciousness, but I'm saying the first step out of the headset with mathematics, we're getting a very, very beautiful structure, which shows a deep unity and yet diversity and connectedness. And what's remarkable is, Markov chains have been around since 1906, and I've been studying them myself for the last 40 years. And the key notion that we used in this is the notion of a trace. If I have a big matrix, and I, like say on 10 states, and then you only look at 3 states. So the 10 state matrix is telling you what's happening, what the probabilities of experiences are. But I'm only looking at 3 of them, say, red, green, and blue. Maybe you've got 10 colors, but I can only see red, green, and blue. The big matrix will induce a dynamics just on the 3, the red, green, and blue that I can see, right? And it'll be unique. If you tell me what the big matrix is, there is a unique answer for what the probabilities are for just the red, green, and blue matrix that would be compatible with the big one. Okay, that makes sense intuitively.
Yeah, well, and it also makes sense. We recently spoke to Jana Levin, in the sort of physical space. And, one of the things she does is she looks for kind of lyrical and prosaic, right, beauty in the rules of the universe. So what I hear, just, as hearing about this and hearing you describe it, what I hear is that there's an order and there's a purpose to even subsets of larger collections, right? Meaning there's some potentially unifying concept that allows even a subset of what we can perceive or experience to have its own rhythm and its own order and its own logic that can be expanded out, but isn't that beautiful that it can also be expanded down, and I can keep also dividing it, right?
Exactly right. So this is a very non-trivial, deep connection. It's not just a hand wave. It's a mathematically precise connection. It's called the trace. So, and there's two notions of trace. When you deal with matrices, some people think about the trace as summing the diagonal elements. That's not what I'm talking about. So I'm not summing diagonal elements. This is a much deeper notion of trace, which is taking the entire probabilistic structure of the matrix and showing you what the new probabilistic structure is for the subset. And for that, it involves an infinite computation. You have to look at all possible paths through all of the states that then go down to the subset. So it's a non-trivial, it's an infinite computation, but it turns out you can do it with closed form. So it's an infinite computation, but you can do it in closed form. So we call it the trace logic, and we haven't published it yet. So the paper, the theorem is done, and we're getting the paper ready for publication. But it is a real logic.
I'm glad you didn't give up at year 39, because you might have been like, I've been doing this 39 years and I haven't figured it out. I'm glad you kept going.
Well, I'm surprised. I mean, I had studied Markov chains for 40 years, and it wasn't until a year and a half ago that I noticed this logic. And I remember telling my collaborator Chetan Prakash. I said, Chetan, I think this is a logic. Technically, it's called a partial order, and I could see that it was anti-symmetric and reflexive, but I couldn't see that it was transitive. I needed a real mathematician to. And Chetan's looked and he said, I don't know, it's too pretty, Don. It's too pretty. But then he went off and proved it. So then I realized there's this whole logic. And then it was only about 6 months ago that I was looking at this and what it means about Einstein's theories. So it's quite stunning. So let's go back to the red, green, and yellow lights at the traffic signal. And suppose I have like a dysfunctional one. So it's not necessarily, if red might go to green, it might go to yellow. It's a bad traffic light, so it's a dangerous traffic light, but just to keep it simple. And suppose I have a matrix for that red, green, and yellow traffic light that's all dysfunctional, but you can only see red and green. You can't see yellow. Well, then what you will see is just the trace, right? The trace of the red, green, yellow onto the red and green. We take these Markov chains and we just have a little counter. Every time you get a new experience, we increase your counter. And these are standard in the theory of Markov chains. They're sometimes called space-time Markov chains. We call it an enhanced Markov chain. But you just have a counter that increments every time you see a new experience. And here's the obvious thing, but it took me a year to see it. So if I'm looking at the 3x3 matrix, red, green, and yellow, and I'm counting every time I see a new red or green or yellow, I increment my counter. Okay. Now, what about the guy that only sees red and green? Well, notice that he's not going to. Every time the bigger guy sees yellow, the little guy doesn't see yellow. So the little guy, his counter isn't going as fast. I just saw that like 6 months ago. Could that be? I mean, so the weird thing about Einstein's space-time is that different observers moving at different speeds see different time. Their clocks go faster or slower. And I thought, it probably isn't, but I should check into it. Maybe I could get Einstein's time dilation out of this. And it looked for certain matrices like it would work. But then, okay, what about length contraction? Einstein shows that if you look at someone who's traveling like on a train past you at constant speed, and they had a meter stick, if you look at their meter stick, pointed in the direction they're moving, it looks like the meter stick is shorter. So it looks like their clock is going slow. You think their clock is going slow, and you think their meter stick is shorter. But if they look at you, and you're holding a meter stick as well, and they look at your clock, they'll think that my clock is going slow, and my meter stick is, so it's completely, in this particular case, it's completely symmetric. And we get that. It turns out that there's a way to assign lengths to these Markov chains. It's something called the commute time between states. So it's a technical thing, but I'll just say there's some mathematicians in Markov theory just in 2017 a guy named Doyle and Steiner, I think, published a paper where he shows that you can embed the states of Markov chain in a Euclidean space by the commute times. And the commute times are the square of the Euclidean distances. So the question was, okay, I've got the clock dilation that Einstein, can I get the length, does it give me the length contraction? And the answer is yes. There is a class of Markov chains that works precisely to give both exactly in coordination. So that's what got us taking off. So now what we're doing is pursuing that. We don't have the final proof that this gives us the full structure of Minkowski space, but we do show that we get the right Lorentz contractions. What we have to do, and this is a conjecture we're probably going to make public, and try to get some real mathematicians, because this is now hard mathematics, is to show that the discrete Markov chain stuff that we're doing with these particular matrices, they're called n cycles. So the n cycles are the ones that give us Einstein's flat spacetime. We want to show that as that n goes to infinity, we get Einstein's smooth flat spacetime directly, exactly. If so, that's a major breakthrough. Then the next step will go to a larger class of matrices in which the length contractions and the time dilations are slightly off, so that you get a curved spacetime. And to show that, once again, a class of matrices, when we take the number of conscious experiences to an infinite limit, in that limit, we will get the smooth spacetime of general relativity.
How does this work, and this breakthrough that you've spent so much of your life working on, change what comes next for all of our everyday lives?
Good question. So I'm going to assume for the moment that the conjectures I'm proposing turn out to work. If it is true that I get Einstein's special and general theory of relativity from these classes of Markov chains in the limit, then it means we've actually taken a first concrete dynamical step outside of spacetime. We actually have a mathematical model that's dynamical outside of spacetime. What the high-energy theoretical physicists have found are these positive geometries, which are static entities, but there's not a dynamical system there yet. We have a dynamical system. And so first thing I want to do is to show that we can maybe get their positive geometries from this. But then this is the first layer of software. If this works, it's the first layer of software we've discovered outside of our headset. And so the analogy I want to give is, suppose you're playing Grand Theft Auto and you're a wizard, and you can go faster than anybody and do all the tricks inside the game. That's pretty impressive. But suppose you're the geek who wrote the software. You know the software. Then you can take the air out of the tires of the wizard. You can give him no gas. You can take his car and move it immediately from one place to another because you wrote the code. You can do things with the code that inside the game look completely miraculous. And so what's going to happen, I think, is if this works, if these conjectures are correct, and we do have the first layer of software outside of space-time, which definitely gives rise to special and general relativity and quantum. But in quantum theory, I can talk how it arises as well. It does arise in this as well as the asymptotic behavior. The long-term behavior gives us the equations of quantum particles, the wave equations for wave functions of free particles. But if it's correct, then we have the first layer of software outside of the space-time headset. That means that the technologies that we should eventually evolve are going to be mind-boggling. For example, one thing that occurs to me is our nearest galaxy, the Andromeda, is 2.4 million light years away. Good luck getting there. That 2.4 million light years away. So you have to go really fast for a very, very long time to get there. And if you go really, really fast, like if you're going like a tenth of the speed of light or something like that, if you run into a piece of dust on the way, you're toast. So, I mean, good luck going to our nearest galaxy anytime soon through space-time. But if we have the software for the headset and space-time is just a headset, we don't have to go through space-time. We should be able to go around space-time. So we should have technologies that would be real technologies that can move us around space-time. Now, I'm not saying I know how to do that yet. I'm just saying this is the kind of thing that opens up.
Well, and plenty of people have, tried to explain anomalous things that they have seen in the sky, which seem to be traveling outside of the rules of observation, not obeying laws of gravity, physics, or the speed of light. This is one of those hand-waving ideas that people say, oh, well, it's operating outside of space and time, and of course it's going to have movement that you can't track because it's operating a different way. That's just hand-waving until you add an actual mathematical concept that explains ways that the space and time that we are operating in to even devise that potential may be limiting in and of itself.
That's right. So it is just a hand wave, and probably most of the observations have other explanations. But if this mathematics is right, it means that there will be a whole class of things that we can do that will look like magic to our current technologies and won't need necessarily to conform to the laws of physics inside our headset. Because once you know how to program the headset, you don't have to obey the laws of the headset. You make the laws of the headset and you can change them. So that's what will be fun to do.
Can we just, for a second, play a little brainstorm game that if this software proves to be solid and true, we're talking about time travel. Are we talking about regeneration of the human form? Are we talking about proving consciousness? Can you brainstorm a little bit with us to help people imagine what types of breakthroughs we may be talking about?
Well, in terms of proving consciousness, it would certainly, if a theory that starts with consciousness outside of space-time gives us space-time and starts to give us technologies, it doesn't prove that consciousness is fundamental, but it certainly shifts the burden of proof, right? Right now, I would say any hard-nosed, intelligent person would have to say, between science and spirituality, which one has the most beef? Well, all of my technology is from science. None of my technology is from spirituality. Just the hard-nosed. So it's really clear who has the more credibility. But if a theory that starts with consciousness all of a sudden gives us new technology that you couldn't have from a physicalist framework, then that shifts. The assumption shifts. And again, I want to be very, very careful. I never want to say that we have the final theory and that we're anywhere close to a theory of everything. I'll explicitly say there is no theory of everything, and Hoffman is 0% of the way toward a theory of everything. Just be very, very clear about that. But I do think we're taking possibly the first baby step outside of space-time with a dynamical theory. The high-energy theoretical physicists are taking the first baby step with their positive geometries. Hopefully, we'll see how those two interact, how they relate. But yeah, I think ultimately then we should be able to do things inside the headset that are indistinguishable from magic right now.
I need a couple examples because I love magic.
Okay.
But we're in the headset. It's not probable now that we could potentially teleport from one city to another, but it may be. But can you give us some other examples of some of the things that could be possible?
Well, the way I would answer your question would be myself to think about, if I wrote Grand Theft Auto, what could I do that would surprise the players inside Grand Theft Auto? So I could do things like, I could all of a sudden, you're driving a Ferrari. Oh, now all of a sudden you're driving a Mustang. I could just, right? Why couldn't I do that? I should be able to do that. Or I should change the paint color on your car. You were driving a red Ferrari, now it's green. Now it's green.
I'm thinking of the Mandela effect, right? The Mandela effect where people supposedly collectively misremember something. Maybe it's just a glitch in the matrix, right? And what it is it's not the Berenstein Bears, it's the Berenstain Bears.
But if I'm trying to think about things that I could accomplish, my son asked me today, he asked me yesterday, in my lifetime, will I be able to download a language? Because he's trying to learn Portuguese. And I thought, I don't know, he's only 17 now. Maybe. Could this technology allow me to download a language? Could it allow me to regrow a limb? Could it allow me to have communication non-verbally with anyone I choose to communicate with? Just as a starting point.
I see no reason not. Like in the Matrix, right? Neo all of a sudden downloads something, and now I know Kung Fu or something like that, right?
I would like to know Kung Fu.
I don't see, I mean, again, I'm not saying I know how to do it, but I'm saying I don't see a principled obstruction, because if what's outside of the headset is this infinite consciousness. So what I'm saying is, ultimately, who are you? You are completely transcendent. You are the infinite consciousness looking through a very, very small headset that only has trillions of experiences. So you've chosen to go from infinity to just a few trillion experiences that you can see yourself through. But you are that infinite consciousness. So you are transcendent, and you could then play with these rules. You could play with what you see inside this particular headset.
And on that way of thinking, then all experiences live outside the headset that are waiting for us to access.
That's right. I would say that our current set of experiences is 0% of the available experiences. We're 0%. In fact, in the Markov stuff that I'm doing right now, my conjecture is that the set of matrices that can possibly project into curved space-time is 0% of the Markov matrices. There'll be an infinite number of matrices. This might sound contradictory. There's going to be an infinite number of Markov matrices that can project into our curved space-time world, and there's 0% of the bigger infinity of all Markov matrices, which means I can begin to explore all these other kinds of headsets that might be out there, what they might be like.
And if I'm someone right now who may feel lost, bored, helpless, confused about why I'm here on this planet, how would I start to think about these ideas as it relates to me right now? Like, how could I start integrating the idea that all of these experiences are out there for me if I'm struggling in this moment?
Well, just on a very personal level, then I can mention, just if you want to go on at it scientifically, but on a personal level, I would just say what this theory is saying to me is there is one infinite consciousness that's mind-blowing how complicated and expansive it is. And you are that consciousness looking at itself through a very limited window. You're picking at yourself through a few trillion experiences that we can have as human beings. But ultimately, death is just taking off the headset. That's what death is. You are the infinite, and you've just looked at yourself from this particular avatar for 70, 80, 90 years, whatever it might be. And at some point, you've had enough, and you take the headset off, and you look at yourself through other avatars. So you don't lose your life, you just lose an avatar.
When we speak to people who have had near-death experiences, that's often exactly how they describe it. They say that it is experienced as if they were inside of a video game in this life, and when they pull back, that's all they experience is consciousness that is connected to other consciousness, and that the feeling of love, as we describe it, in human terms, is the closest they can come to describing what it feels like is in charge, right? So that kind of notion of a near-death experience, of kind of like removing the headset, that feels very in line with how you're describing this from a mathematical perspective.
I agree. It does sound very, very similar. I'm a hard-nosed scientist, and so but I'm not closed-minded. So my attitude about all these things is I listen respectfully with a big grain of salt until I have a theory and repeatable experiments that to confirm things. But I do not dismiss them out of hand at all. And I think that so I agree that they're very, very suggestive, that seems to match with this headset kind of point of view. But I guess my only caution is never be dogmatic, and that's including me about my own theory. Dogmatism stops all inquiry. It stops progress. Dogmatism about physicalism being fundamental, dogmatism about my theory being correct, any dogmatism, we should always be open to people contradicting, offering evidence against us and so forth, but logic against us.
You talked about the geometries, and we've spoken about this before. I think we spoke about it with Jan 11 as well. Can you explain as briefly as you can, just so that we can sort of encapsulate it, when you say that people are seeing different geometries, what are you talking about, and how are we seeing those things?
Oh, okay. So the positive geometries, what they've discovered. So when I say that they're seeing them, that was very, very informal.
Yeah.
I'll be a little bit more precise.
Yeah.
They're finding that if they posit these mathematical structures, something called the amplituhedron, something called an associahedron, something called cosmological polytope, and other things. So there's specific mathematical structures. They've discovered that these mathematical structures, which sort of are like, intuitively, they're like big diamonds, but high dimensional diamonds outside of space-time, so to speak, the big geometries. The volumes and the surface structure and the edge structure captures remarkably properties of how particles interact inside space-time. What is the probability that, two particles hit each other and three particles go spraying out with different momenta and spins and so forth? These are called scattering amplitudes. And they find early on, like gluon scattering amplitudes and other kinds of scattering amplitudes were coded in these. And the structure also include, so these are structures that are outside of space-time. They don't care about quantum theory. There's no unitarity. There's no Hilbert spaces. So all the standard structure of quantum theory is not there. These are not quantum processes. There are no Hilbert spaces. And yet, the structures code for unitary processes inside space-time, and they give you the right scattering amplitudes as a function of different volumes inside of them. So that's what's happening right now, is the remarkable discovery that there are these geometries that are compactly coding for stuff inside space-time. But the question is why? Well, what is the dynamic, for example, that would lead to this? So yeah, it's only in the last, since 2010 or so, 2013, with the first amplituhedron was published, was in 2013. There was earlier work that suggesting this. They were finding simpler ways of computing the scattering amplitudes even in the 80s. But it wasn't until 2013 where we got our first structure. The interesting thing about it, I'll just say, is when you do these computations of the scattering probabilities for the particles inside spacetime, you have to use these Feynman diagrams, and you get these sometimes just tons and tons of terms, 40 pages of terms to compute for one interaction, one scattering interaction. And when you do it outside of spacetime and these positive geometries in general, you get incredibly simpler. I'm not saying simple, the mathematics, but the computational burden is dramatically less. So you don't care about space-time, you don't care about unitarity, you don't care about quantum theory, you're outside of that. And the mathematics gets much simpler for describing what goes on inside space-time. So the physicists are thinking, we're on to something here, but what is it that we're on to? The ERCs put 10 million euros on it. They're excited. You don't put 10 million euros on something that's a dead horse.
I mean, this is fascinating. I need to circle one more time to the ability to create things as unique as changing the car in Grand Theft Auto, because I listed a couple cool ones, but also we could potentially have abundance of food. We could have endless energy. But just as there was a race to harness nuclear technology during the Second World War, you could also imagine an infinite technology that can create all this positive could also create an enormous amount of destruction. Is there a risk with unlocking this capability?
Absolutely. No doubt about it. The nuclear power that gives us lots of wonderful electricity has killed hundreds of thousands of people as well, in bombs. And the power to have unlimited energy that we might get from this new theory outside of space-time, and the power to go from here to any galaxy without any elapse of time, is wonderful. But the downside is that you could make the headset really nasty for other people. Once you have that kind of power, you are like playing God vis-a-vis people inside this headset. Absolutely. So yeah, it's the genie gets out of the bottle.
It seems as though humanity is evolving to see more outside of the headset, to try and better understand the true nature of reality. As we do that, what is your vision for how we will progress in the next 5, 10, even 50 years?
Well, my own guess, based on my own experience of myself, is even though I've studied this stuff for 40 years, and I've been working on consciousness outside of space-time for 40 years, deep down, I don't believe it emotionally, right? Deep down, I'm still, if someone put a gun to my head, I'd be scared to death. I'm very tied to my avatar, and we all are. So my guess is human nature isn't changing anytime soon, and we're going to continue to have these problems. If we get the new technologies, our old human nature, even though our theories are telling us that this is because we're all one, and your neighbor is yourself, and you should love your neighbor as yourself. That's what this technology is telling us. That's what the technology is based on. We're still addicted to our avatars, and so we will not, most of us will not use it that way, and we will not. That's my guess, and I'm looking at myself, right? I'm looking at my own human-centered, selfish-centered, Darwinian point of view that it's survival of me. If the science really makes this turn and says consciousness is fundamental, and says we really are one. If it turns out the science, this theory is a good next step, and science says, yes, this is a good next step, and this next step does confirm what spiritual traditions have been saying, that you should love your neighbor as yourself because your neighbor is yourself, just looking through a different headset. I think that will have a big impact. And when technologies are evolving that are based on the idea that consciousness is fundamental, and that's where the technology is coming from, that will lend credence. So I think it will help us pull ourselves out, but it will be against, we will have to work against our avatar nature, which is to be self-centered. But I think it will give us the motivation to do that, to say it is worth the effort to let go of my addiction to myself as the center of the world, and making you my enemy, or making you, someone of a different religion my enemy, and so forth. So I think if once science says space-time is doomed and consciousness is fundamental and we are one, at least that's our next best theory, and here's the technology that comes from it, that will make people much more interested perhaps in meditation and letting go of themselves. Possibly, but I'm not saying it's going to be kumbaya right away. I don't think so. I just think that right now the spiritual traditions have no technology, so the smart person is just not going to. They're not going to bet on them. If you have technology, then maybe you know something. Right now, the technology is on those who say the physical world is all there is, and there's no spiritual world. But if the technology is now from those who say, no, there is something that transcends the physical world and it is spiritual, that changes the culture. That will fundamentally change it.
One of the really beautiful take-home messages, and in particular, you hit on this throughout the book, is, we used to be amazed at optical illusions, right? And you have many really beautiful examples of, perceptual illusions and things like that in the book. And then we learned that, a dog whistle is not heard by us, right? But it's heard by dogs. And there's a difference in perception ability, right, across the auditory system, the olfactory system, the visual system. We're only seeing a very limited, set of wavelengths. So for me, what you're presenting is kind of the next level, of this kind of conversation. And I think that's something that everybody can hold on to. In the same way that you learned, right, that the auditory system, the olfactory system, the visual system has a tremendous variation, so does our perceptual system about consciousness, about intuition, and even things like psi phenomenon, things that we couldn't get our heads around. What if those are just different parts of a spiritual wavelength that you're helping us tap into with this, level of scientific inquiry?
That would be the thing. We can get a mathematical model of this so that it's no longer just a hand wave, and then just isolated examples of I had this experience and they had this. We now have a mathematical framework which makes a coherent prediction, so we can now start to predict the psi phenomena to several decimal places and then go measure them. Now we're playing the right game.
I love that. The book is The Case Against Reality, How Evolution Hid the Truth from Our Eyes. Dr. Hoffman, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Wonderful time.
Jonathan, I know that conversation may have dived into a little bit more theoretical mathematics, but I think that there was some really, really powerful stuff in there that I'm really glad we kind of, got to weave our way through, because I'm really interested in his, intersection of science and spirituality, which, I think he's really, really articulating. But also there's some really beautiful implications, which I think we covered as well.
No one can focus because everyone is just waiting for your Beatle jokes.
Well, when you talk about the lack of discrimination of the males of that particular species, like they're not even getting anything back. They're just rubbing up against a beer bottle and calling it love.
They want the biggest bottle they can find.
You know what I actually thought? The thing that first came into my head was like, and I'm speaking to, there's two very funky, independent thinking women in the room with me right now. When you like that guy and he's smart and he's funky too, but then he gets taken away by the cheerleader girl and she convinces him to just be basic. And you're like, no, but you're special and you used to wear Doc Martens. That's what I think of the bottle. It's it's just a basic girl who took him away and he doesn't know what he's doing. It's not going to lead to anything good. He should be with me. I also thought of the Taylor Swift song, anyway.
Which Taylor Swift song?
She wears short skirts and I wear sneakers. She's cheer captain and I'm on the bleachers. She is a bottle that was thrown in the dirt.
She's a dimpled bottle. Brown and dimpled.
And the bigger the better.
He talks about how we perceive 0% of reality.
That's a very powerful statement. He loves his 0%. They're all over the place.
0% chance I'm even in this conversation right now.
There's a 0% chance that what we're even perceiving now is part of the conversation.
If I look away, you don't exist.
Indeed. And I think that the notion, of how you apply this to kind of your daily life, one of the ways is, I think, what Dr. Hoffman talked about. What does it mean to be an open skeptic? What does it mean to say, maybe I don't know? Maybe anything that we're dogmatic about, we need to have just a little bit of opening, and if you've ever tried to have a debate with a teenager, not saying that I have recently, there's this extreme certainty about everything. And sometimes even as adults, right? We have this extreme certainty. Guess what? Maybe everything that we think we're certain about is literally a headset that can be removed, right? What does that do to our daily life? How do we view death, right? How do we view all of our interactions, that we have that trouble us, right? I've started saying that to myself when things trouble me, it's just data, it's zeros and ones, and I don't like the zeros and ones, but it doesn't change the nature of, reality as we know it.
And what is a projection? What am I actually interpreting and experiencing right now? How much does come from my own internal bias? How much does it come from the fact that I may have a narrative about how something should be? I've heard him in other interviews talk about the nature of the narratives and the fact that we assume that we have to have something certain. One of my lines that I love the most, he said, "Who was the richest person in the 1700s in France?" You don't know, nor should you care. In 300 years, no one's going to remember who the top podcast was or who had the most of, Nike shoes. I love Nike shoes sometimes. So how do you then break down the way that you're impacted on a daily basis and truly find and navigate the things that are important to you, understanding that we have a precious, and until he proves his theory, finite amount of time, because maybe his theory ends up extending all of our lives for a very long amount of time. But until then,
I don't think that's what, I really don't think that's what, part of the equation will be. I think a bigger consciousness means more expansiveness and, as Buddhism teaches, less attachment, to the here and now, including our body, including our loved ones, and especially those things that we hold most dear.
if you want to check out things that are dear to us and we hope are dear to you, check out Mayim Bialik's Breakdown on Substack, where the growing community of breakers is exploring the intersection of science and spirituality, and we release exclusive content that we don't release anywhere else, so make sure to check it out.
From our breakdown to the one we hope you never have. We'll see you next time.
It's Mayim Bialik's Breakdown. She's gonna break it down for you. She's got a neuroscience PhD or two. One fiction, one. And now she's gonna break down. It's a breakdown. She's gonna break it down.